Right now, as you are watching this, geologists across the state of Texas are staring at their monitors trying to answer a question they have not had to ask in over a century. At 9 minutes past 5 in the morning on July 23, 2026, the ground near a small panhandle town called Spearman, Texas, tore open with a magnitude 5.0 earthquake. According to the United States Geological Survey, it is the strongest earthquake recorded in that entire region in at least 100 years. Not the strongest this decade, the strongest since before most of our grandparents were born. And right now, tonight, scientists are racing to figure out why. This is not a normal news cycle story. This is a state that has spent its entire history reasonably confident it did not need to think about earthquakes, suddenly forced to reckon with a question it has no good answer for yet. Today we are going to break down exactly what happened, why this specific region has almost no history of seismic activity, and why a nearly identical crisis one state over may be the key to understanding everything that happens next. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the facts, the science, and the real stakes. Drop a comment right now. Have you ever felt an earthquake somewhere you never expected one? A rumble that shouldn't have happened where you live? Tell me where you were and what it felt like. Thousands of you live in parts of this country that used to be considered seismically quiet, and I want to hear your stories. If you want to be the first to know every time something major happens geologically, subscribe to the channel right now. It is completely free. A thumbs up also helps enormously. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one, so the algorithm actually shows it to the people who need to see it. Thank you. Now, let us get into it. At 5:21 in the morning, local time, residents across the Texas Panhandle were jolted awake by a violent, sustained shaking that many initially mistook for a passing truck or a tornado touching down. It was neither. The United States Geological Survey confirmed a magnitude 5.0 earthquake, centered roughly 24 miles southeast of Spearman, in Roberts County, at a depth of approximately 5.7 kilometers. The shaking radiated outward with astonishing reach. Residents in Amarillo, nearly 70 miles away, reported feeling it distinctly. It rattled homes as far as Oklahoma City, and residents even reported feeling it in Tulsa, hundreds of miles to the northeast. A second earthquake, a magnitude 3.9 aftershock, struck an entirely separate part of central Texas later that same day. A chilling reminder that this was not an isolated fluke confined to one small town. Across social media in the hours that followed, the same details repeated over and over. Dishes rattling violently in kitchen cabinets. A deep, unfamiliar rumble seconds before the shaking began. A wave of confusion sweeping through towns that have never had to think about what an earthquake actually feels like. Some residents said their first instinct was to check the sky for a tornado, because in this part of the country, that is the disaster the body is trained to expect. In towns across the High Plains, including Mobeetie, Wellington, Pampa, White Deer, and the LaForce area, residents reported pictures crashing off walls and drywall splitting open. Mercifully, no injuries and no major structural collapses were reported. But mercy is not the same as an explanation, and right now, nobody has one. Let us talk about the human story inside this event, because it tells you everything about how unprepared this region genuinely was. Mitchell Locke, the county judge serving as emergency management coordinator for one of the affected counties, told reporters that his own cat woke him up moments before the shaking hit, as if some instinct in the animal sensed it coming before he did. When asked directly about his county's earthquake response plan, Judge Locke gave an answer that should stop you in your tracks. There isn't one. His county has response plans for wildfires, for tornadoes, for flash flooding. Earthquakes were never part of the conversation, because in this part of Texas, they simply never happened. A neighboring county judge admitted he did not even have a way to quickly check whether a nearby dam had sustained structural damage, because checking dams for earthquake damage had never once been part of anyone's routine there. This is what happens when a disaster that was never supposed to visit a place shows up anyway. Here is the number that made every seismologist in the country sit up straight. According to the official USGA's earthquake catalog, this is only the fourth earthquake of magnitude 4.0 or greater ever recorded in the Texas Panhandle since the year 1900. Read that again, the fourth in 126 years. When an event this statistically rare occurs, scientists do not ask how big it was first. They ask why here and why now. And right now, the honest answer is that nobody knows for certain. To understand why that uncertainty is so loaded, we need to travel a few hundred miles south, to a part of Texas that has quietly become one of the most seismically transformed regions in the entire country over the last 15 years. The Permian Basin in West Texas has become what researchers at the University of Texas have literally described as an unplanned experiment in reshaping the earth beneath our feet, conducted at a staggering scale. Oil and gas production there generates enormous volumes of contaminated wastewater as a byproduct of extraction. We are talking about approximately 15 million barrels of produced water every single day in that region alone, and researchers estimate that over roughly the past 15 years, something in the neighborhood of 50 billion barrels of that wastewater has been pumped underground across the broader region. Multiple peer-reviewed studies, including research conducted through Southern Methodist University and the University of Texas Bureau of Economic Geology, have confirmed a direct and measurable link between that injection activity and a dramatic surge in local earthquakes. More than 4,000 earthquakes of magnitude 3.0 or greater, and at least 10 of magnitude 5.0 or greater, have been directly tied to this kind of injection-triggered activity. A magnitude 5.0 earthquake in March of 2020, in that very same basin, was formally assessed by USCGES researchers as likely triggered by wastewater disposal. Near the city of Pecos, Texas, researchers identified more than 45,000 individual seismic events between 2000 and 2017 alone in a single concentrated cluster, the overwhelming majority too small to ever be felt, but painting an unmistakable picture of a fault system being repeatedly and artificially triggered rather than behaving the way nature intended. A similarly documented situation exists around Fort Worth in North Texas, where injection into a formation called the Fort Worth Basin has triggered smaller but still significant seismicity, dangerously close to a metropolitan area home to more than 8 million people. Now let us break down the actual mechanism, because this is where the real science gets genuinely fascinating. When oil and gas wells extract hydrocarbons, they also bring up enormous volumes of naturally occurring salt water trapped deep in the same rock formations. This produced water is not leftover fracking fluid. It is a natural byproduct of extraction, and in states like Oklahoma, over 90% of all wastewater injected underground falls into this exact category. That water has to go somewhere, and for decades, the standard industry practice has been pumping it back deep underground, often into porous rock layers sitting directly above what geologists call the crystalline basement, ancient solid rock, in many cases well over 1 billion years old, that has remained essentially motionless for the entire span of human civilization. Here is the terrifying part. That injected fluid does not simply stay where it is put. Through a process called pressure diffusion, it can migrate downward over months or even years into that ancient basement layer, where long-dormant faults have sat locked in place by friction and the sheer weight of rock pressing down on them for hundreds of millions of years. Raise the pressure along one of those faults by even a small amount, sometimes less pressure than you would feel diving a few extra feet underwater in a swimming pool, and it can be enough to let 2 blocks of already stressed rock finally slip. The earthquake is not caused by the water shaking anything directly. It is caused by the water quietly stealing away the friction that was the only thing holding an ancient, already loaded fault in place. If this story sounds disturbingly familiar, it is because we have watched almost this exact nightmare unfold before, one state over, and what happened next in that story matters enormously for what Texas may be facing right now. Oklahoma's crisis began in 2008 and 2009, as the state's oil and gas industry dramatically ramped up wastewater disposal activity tied to its own drilling boom. For most of its history, Oklahoma experienced only about 1 or 2 earthquakes of magnitude 3.0 or greater per year, a genuinely quiet seismic state by any measure. By 2013, the Oklahoma Geological Survey was recording an average of 2 magnitude 3+ earthquakes every single week, and stated flatly that this pattern was, in their own words, very unlikely to represent a naturally occurring process. A landmark 2014 study published in the prestigious journal Science, led by Cornell seismologist Katie Karanen, formally confirmed the link to wastewater injection. By the time researchers finished tallying the damage, Oklahoma's annual seismicity rate had increased by a staggering factor of roughly 900 compared to its historical baseline, briefly making it the most seismically active region in the entire continental United States, more active even than California. The human cost was severe and undeniable. In November of 2011, a magnitude 5.7 earthquake devastated the town of Prague, Oklahoma, at the time the largest earthquake in state history. It damaged more than a dozen homes, injured at least 2 people, and buckled a stretch of highway. A later scientific study tied that earthquake directly to nearby wastewater disposal wells. Then in September of 2016, an even larger magnitude 5.8 earthquake struck near Pawnee, shattering the previous record, cracking historic brick buildings in the downtown district, and damaging facades across the town. That magnitude nearly matched what seismologists calculate as the natural ceiling this fault system could have produced over 1,900 years of ordinary tectonic loading, except this one arrived on a human timeline compressed into less than a decade. Homeowners in both towns eventually filed legal claims against energy operators to recover their losses, turning a scientific debate into a genuine financial reckoning. Oklahoma's own state seismologist later reflected that people simply do not appreciate the sheer volume of water injected underground during those years. 4 of the 5 largest earthquakes in the entire recorded history of Oklahoma turned out to be caused by human activity. But here is the part of this story that should give Texas real, genuine hope instead of pure dread. Because Oklahoma's story does not end in disaster, it ends in proof that this exact crisis can be brought under control. Starting in late 2014, Oklahoma's governor convened what became known as the Coordinating Council on Seismic Activity, bringing together state regulators, university scientists, and, critically, oil and gas industry representatives who had previously fought hard against any suggestion that their operations were responsible. One influential industry figure, Oklahoma City Petroleum executive Kim Hatfield, played a pivotal role in convincing skeptical colleagues to actually join the conversation instead of disputing the science from the sidelines. By 2015, regulators began issuing sweeping directives covering entire regions rather than individual wells, eventually affecting more than 1,400 disposal wells across a staggering 15,000 square miles, cutting wastewater disposal volumes in the most dangerous zones by roughly 800,000 barrels a day compared to 2014 levels. New rules required operators to report their daily injection volumes for the first time, closing a critical information gap. The specific fix that worked was restricting how deep operators could inject, keeping fluid further away from that ancient basement rock. A change research showed could cut annual seismic energy release by a factor of nearly 2 to 3. After 2015, Oklahoma's earthquake rates fell sharply. The danger was not eliminated entirely. Fluid already pushed underground kept triggering occasional tremors for years afterward, but the crisis was, in a real and measurable way, brought under control through regulation, not through the industry simply shutting down. That is the story Texas is now quietly living through its own version of. Researchers have split the Permian Basin's seismicity into 7 separate induced seismicity systems, each behaving differently enough that no single blanket rule could possibly work across all of them. In some of those zones, operators are injecting wastewater deep, close to that ancient basement layer, which tends to trigger earthquakes far more readily. In others, injection happens in shallower formations, generally safer from a seismic standpoint, but creating an entirely different kind of headache, since raising pressure closer to the surface can interfere with new drilling or damage aging wellbores never designed to handle it, potentially letting contaminated water leak into groundwater supplies instead. There is no simple, one-size-fits-all fix here. Every solution trades one risk for a different one, which is exactly why researchers describe this as requiring a genuinely region-by-region understanding rather than a single sweeping rule from Austin. Texas built its own dedicated monitoring network, TexNet, in 2017, specifically because state regulators watched Oklahoma's nightmare unfold and understood they needed the same kind of real-time, high-resolution seismic picture before a crisis spiraled out of control, not after. Before TexNet existed, much of the state relied on seismic stations scattered hundreds of kilometers apart, so sparse that researchers piecing together earthquake sequences from before 2017 have had to go back years later and recalculate their exact locations using newer techniques just to understand where and how deep those older quakes truly occurred. That gap is closed now, which is precisely why a scientist telling you the cause of Wednesday's earthquake is still unclear is not making excuses. The instruments to actually find out are running in real time, in a way they simply were not a decade ago. Now here is where I need to be completely honest with you, because it would be easy to take everything you just heard and assume this new Texas earthquake is obviously connected to oil and gas activity. It might be. It might not be. The truth right now is that we simply do not know, and I refuse to tell you otherwise just to make this story feel more dramatic. The Texas Panhandle is not the Permian Basin. It is not the Fort Worth Basin either. It sits over 100 miles from those well-documented injection zones, with a far thinner history of the intensive deep well activity scientifically linked to those other earthquake clusters. A National Weather Service meteorologist in Amarillo, A.J. Harrell, told reporters plainly that there are minor natural fault lines running through the Panhandle capable of producing weak to moderate earthquakes entirely on their own. They simply do not do it often. As of this recording, no geologist has published any specific causal link between this earthquake and injection activity in that immediate area. The honest scientific position is that the cause remains unclear, and anyone claiming certainty right now is getting ahead of the actual evidence. I also want to directly shut down something you are going to see spreading online in the coming days. Some corners of the internet will try to connect this earthquake to unrelated flooding that struck an entirely different part of Texas in an entirely different week, driven by a completely different physical mechanism, heavy rainfall and atmospheric moisture, not fault movement deep underground. There is no credible scientific basis for linking those two events, and no geologist is investigating them as related phenomena, because there is no physical pathway connecting them whatsoever. Stretching two real, serious events into one invented narrative does not make either of them more important. It just makes the real story, a genuine, quietly building earthquake risk across the American mid-continent, harder to see clearly. It is worth pausing on just how quickly this entire category of danger went from non-existent to routine across the middle of this country. Before roughly 2008, states like Oklahoma and Texas simply were not part of the national conversation about earthquake preparedness at all. That conversation belonged to California, Alaska, and the Pacific Northwest, places sitting on well-known tectonic boundaries with decades of building codes and school drills built around that exact risk. School children in Los Angeles have practiced earthquake drills since before their grandparents were born. School children in the Texas Panhandle have practiced tornado drills instead, because for the entire span of recorded local history, that is what a bad day there had always looked like. Communities like Roberts County, Texas, quite reasonably built their entire emergency planning around the disasters that actually visited them regularly: tornadoes, wildfires, flash floods, ice storms. What Oklahoma's crisis proved, and what Texas may now be discovering, is that earthquake risk is not only a function of which side of a tectonic plate boundary you happen to call home. It can also be the direct result of industrial decisions made decades after a region was originally mapped for seismic hazard. Decisions made one injection well at a time, often with almost nobody outside the industry realizing the risk profile of an entire region was quietly changing beneath their feet, year after year, barrel after barrel. But do not let this become a story of pure fear, because that would not be honest either. Oklahoma's regulatory turnaround proved decisively that this specific kind of triggered earthquake responds to intervention in a way a genuine tectonic megathrust fault simply never could. You cannot regulate a tectonic plate into slowing down. You absolutely can regulate how deep and how fast a company is allowed to inject wastewater underground. The exact tools that brought Oklahoma's earthquake rate down by 2015 already exist. They are already understood. They are already being applied in parts of the Permian Basin today. The only real open question for the Texas Panhandle is not whether a fix exists if injection turns out to be the cause. It is simply whether that connection gets confirmed at all. And Texas built TexNet for the exact purpose of answering that question with hard data instead of speculation, something Oklahoma's own scientists tragically did not have back when their crisis first began in 2008. Here is what you can actually control right now, no matter which side of this uncertainty you find yourself on. If you live anywhere across the American mid-continent, in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Kansas, or Colorado, regions that were never historically considered earthquake country, it is worth taking 10 honest minutes this week to do 3 simple things. Know where your gas shutoff valve is located and how to turn it off by hand. Secure heavy furniture and top-heavy bookshelves to the wall, especially in bedrooms. And have a basic family communication plan for what happens if cell towers get overloaded the way they often do in the chaotic first hour after any sudden disaster. None of this requires becoming a prepper. It requires about the same effort as checking your smoke detector batteries, for a risk that a decade of hard data now says is not nearly as remote as this region once assumed. If there is one sentence you take away from everything in this video, let it be this. Texas did not develop an earthquake problem overnight, and it did not fall from the sky or arrive from some distant ocean fault line. It was built, one injection well at a time, over 15 quiet years, the exact same way Oklahoma's crisis was built before it, and July 23, 2026 may simply be the morning that risk finally reached a county that never saw it coming. Somewhere tonight, in a courthouse office in the Texas Panhandle, an emergency binder is sitting open to a blank page that says Earthquake Response Plan, and somebody is finally starting to fill it in. That is what this story actually is. Not a mystery for its own sake, but the exact moment a region discovers, all at once, that the ground it built its whole life on top of has quietly stopped being as stable as everyone assumed. We are going to keep tracking this story closely as TexNet and the USGAs release more detailed analysis in the coming days and weeks. Whether this earthquake ultimately gets traced back to injection activity, or whether it is confirmed as one of the genuinely rare natural events this ancient region can still produce entirely on its own. Both answers matter enormously, and neither one is confirmed yet, which is exactly why it is worth waiting for real data instead of choosing whichever version sounds more dramatic for a headline. Subscribe right now so you do not miss the moment we get a real answer. Drop a comment and tell me if you have ever felt an earthquake somewhere you never expected one. Let us push for 5,000 likes on this video so the algorithm puts this in front of the people who genuinely need to see it. We will see you in the next one.